John Wojciechowski, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, and what your childhood was like?
Um, I am from Sterling Heights, Michigan, outside of Detroit, and I grew up in a pretty musical household. My dad actually played Hammond um, professionally until right up around the time I was on the scene. Um, well, I think actually he may have stopped playing when he got drafted. Um, in the early 70s, so that kind of probably put an end to that. But
Mm.
he was a sheet metal worker, and he also played back when you could play in a band that would sit in a club for 6 nights a week. So he played Hammond and had a pretty extensive record collection. So I guess I was musically inclined. He had a melodica laying around, and I picked it up and I started, I guess, figure out some tunes on it. So I think I was around 8 years old or so, and he said, "I think maybe this kid should play an instrument." So um, I settled on the saxophone. I liked the sound of the saxophone, so that's kind of what I settled on. And he went about finding me a good teacher, um, which I think is probably an advantage to having parents who know what's up. They don't just send you to whoever. So he stumbled upon a man named Jerry Gravel, who was in the Detroit area and was a doubler. I think he was primarily a show guy, but he also did a lot of writing. I think he wrote for a lot of people in the 50s and 60s. But he was my first teacher. And so, he taught me how to play the saxophone. And in addition to some method books and stuff, he also would bring in sheets of these. I didn't know what they were, but it turns out they were standard tunes. And so I learned a lot of the kind of the American songbook through those lessons. And he also got me started doubling when I was pretty young. I think I was in sixth grade maybe when I first started playing flute. And then it wasn't long after that I started playing clarinet. So, and I know you were in a similar situation. You were doubling pretty early on. So um, I feel fortunate, I watched a lot of I'm sure probably you did too, a lot of our college colleagues kind of struggling with that stuff, um, where we were already, I think, ahead of the game. Um,
Yeah, my dad insisted.
yeah,
It was you know, and what I tell my students all the time is if you play saxophone, that means you play flute and clarinet also.
hmm
And I mean, that's if you want to work. I mean, if you don't
right.
want to work, you can, hey, I specialize in 1940s big band music, only
Yep,
playing alto.
that's
Okay,
right.
that's great, but you're not going to work.
That's right. There's been a lot of situations that I've been in because, I'm not the world's greatest flute player. I'm definitely not the world's greatest clarinet player, but I can cover the parts and I can sound good. But I'll get hired for a situation where, although actually I should say, I really like improvising on flute. So that's kind of sort of a side thing I think that I can do. Um, but, I'll get called for situations where you need somebody who can play good flute and clarinet, but also improvise. And there's not a lot of people that do that. And, you kind of find yourself in situations that other people can't do.
Yeah.
It, no, like you said, it kind of sets you apart, I think, um, from other folks. Um, Anyhow, that's a tangent, I guess, right? So
That's
that's
right.
how I started playing. Um, and then I was also really fortunate in high school that I had a band director who was a drummer, and he had this session in his basement every week with some other musicians, and they were playing jazz music. And so he started inviting me every once in a while to these sessions, which kind of blows my mind now because I don't know that you could do. my dad would drop me off at my band director's house, and I would go play in his basement, and then he would bring me home afterwards. Like I don't see that happening these days.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But regardless, I mean, those guys tolerated me. Man, I didn't know what I was doing. I played almost entirely by ear. I didn't really understand harmony yet, and but they tolerated me, and it was a really good experience for me to be playing with grown men. You know, one of whom was it was a harmonica player in the band, and it turned out his name is Joe Messina. He's one of the two guitar players that were in the Funk Brothers at Motown. He had kind of stopped playing guitar and taken up harmonica. So anyway, at some point, I wasn't really taking lessons with Mr. Gravel anymore because, like, you know, a good teacher will do. They'll kind of be like, it's time for you to move on to somebody else. And so I didn't really know what to do. And there was a really great saxophone player in Detroit named George Benson, who everybody loved. And, you know, he just passed last year, I think. And at any rate, my high school band teacher says, well, you know, why don't you go see if you could get lessons from George Benson? To me, this is crazy, right? Because I've been watching this guy play since I was a little kid. I'm thinking, he gives lessons? This is nuts. So at any rate, you know, back to having supportive parents, my dad would drive me down to 7 and Gratiot, and I took lessons with George at the Detroit Wayne Saxophone Studio. And man, I mean, I've had some really great teachers, but I really think George was the one that in many ways was the most important one. He taught me about harmony. Because I had been kind of picking stuff off of records and listening, but I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I didn't know how to place what I was playing over something new, you know? And so he kind of taught me how scales and chords work. And then suddenly you kind of realize, oh, so that's that sound that's got a name, you know. Now I know what to do with that. He also told me something really, really, there were two pieces of information he gave me early on, I think were really important. One was, he said, look, I can show you about 5% of what you need to know. The other 95% you're going to have to figure out. Which at the time, I don't think really struck me, but looking back on that now, I think it gave me subconsciously permission to be curious and to just kind of go and try to figure stuff out on my own and not wait for somebody to tell me what to figure out or what to learn. You know, just, you got to go for it, right? The other thing he told me that was super valuable and something that I have all my students do is he said, you should be able to, I've since found out, I think this actually came from Fred Hemke at Northwestern, but he said, you ought to know all your scales and chords so well that when you play them, you can read out of a book or magazine and understand what you're reading. So that's something I would work on, you know, but it makes perfect sense, right?
That's great.
Like
That's great.
You can't be thinking about individual notes.
Yeah.
You got to be thinking much broader contexts of harmony, you know, in the moment. So, yeah, that was all through high school. And that was just, you know, man, he was just so great. And then, so you and I met doing the Michigan All-State Big Band, right?
Yeah, MSBOA, I think
Right.
it was. Yeah, I think I was 8th grade, and I think you were a sophomore.
Yeah.
in high
I
school.
don't know if you were still doing it, but I did it. I guess I did it 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. But when I was in 12th grade, I was all set to go to Berkeley. I had a full ride to go to Berkeley, and that was where I was going to go. And I was playing in that band, and Trent Kinniston, who is our common teacher at Western Michigan,
Yeah.
was directing the band, you know. And some people who I respected George being one of them, had all told me that, like, you really ought to think about getting a music education degree. And it just seemed like, in talking to a few people, like Berkeley wasn't really the place I ought to do that. Strangely enough, I really had no intention of being a teacher at the time. People who I respected were telling me I ought to do this. So anyway, I really liked Trent, and he kind of worked it out so I could go to Western the following fall. So that's how I ended up at Western, and studied with him and met some really great friends who I, basically learned how to play, hanging out with and playing gigs and writing for and all that kind of stuff. So that's, now we're at college now, I guess. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Now you also did a master's degree, right?
I did. So after doing 4 years at Western, getting a music ed degree, although I kind of acted like I was a performance major, I just, did the ed degree. After that, I moved to New York and I started a master's at the Manhattan School, because I was, going to move to New York, do the thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, I really didn't like living in New York City. And at the time, it was a strange time to be at Manhattan because right when I got there, there were really there weren't a lot of great players. There were some good ones, but it was a strange time. I think I just was kind of generally unhappy with the city, and it was also really difficult to go from a situation where I had been playing a lot, because we played a lot in Kalamazoo and Western Michigan, and then suddenly, when you're 20, 21 years old and you move to New York City, you haven't wrapped your head yet around the fact that, things take time. You don't just walk in and start working all the time. So I was there for about 6 months, and I just kind of came to the realization that, like, this is not where I want to stay for 30 years, trying to eke out a living here. So I moved back to Detroit and started teaching. I was teaching elementary band and jazz band, and did that for a little while. And while I was doing that, I also got a master's degree from Wayne State in composition, in classical composition. Strangely enough, because of a class I took at Manhattan with Dave LaLama, the pianist and arranger. The class was called Jazz Arranging and Composing, but he was finishing up a doctorate in classical composition at NYU at the time. And so he had us doing a lot of sort of classical techniques. And I just was really intrigued by it. And I really, really loved it. And I thought, kind of while I was there, I was a jazz saxophone major, which once I started, it just seemed really stupid because I thought, I'm going to do this anyway. Like, I need to do something that's going to stretch me into a different direction and help me grow, not do the same thing I've been doing my whole life and I'm going to continue to do. Also, I don't know if you've ever experienced this in school. You get to a point where you're kind of tired of people telling you what you need to know, and you have things that you want to study, right? And so you get sort of frustrated by that. So I started that master's at Wayne State in Detroit and did classical composition, which was, I had started writing in college, jazz compositions for a group I played in with Xavier Davis and Keith Hall and Matt Hughes. We had a little band together, and we would gig all the time and rehearse all the time and hang out and listen to records and stuff. And
Yeah, what was the name of that?
the Groove Tet.
Yeah.
Which, that's a funny story too, because the name of that, we were making a tape for something. I forget what we were recording at John Stites to send to something. And so we needed a band name. And I think, by the time we finished this recording, it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I'm guessing the recording was due the next day. So we had to come up with some kind of name. I could be wrong on this. I think it was Xavier that came up with the name The Groove Tet, but it stuck. So at any
So
rate,
so
no, go ahead.
yeah, so you and Xavier and Keith, you guys were. Um, so when I got there, you had all graduated,
Right. Yeah.
and so I had come in. I think so. When did you finish your undergrad?
95.
Yeah, see, and that's when I came in. So
Right.
you finished in what is it, spring of '95, and I came
Right.
in
That fall.
fall, yeah, that fall.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of talk, a lot of buzz about the Groove Tet, and you guys made a quite an impression, and quite an impression on the other students that were still around when I was there,
Mm.
and on the city. You were talking about playing a lot in Kalamazoo,
Hmm.
and then when you move to New York and you're in a new city and stuff, and it's slow. But I also think it says something about Kalamazoo too, because for a college town as small as Kalamazoo is, uh, Kalamazoo is hip.
That's
You know,
true. That's
yes,
true.
yes,
And but I will tell you, Keith actually, um, I think gets a lot of credit for us working so much because he would go into places that maybe had music, maybe didn't have music, or maybe if they had music, they didn't necessarily have jazz. And he was able to kind of go in there and sell them on us coming in and doing our thing. And I mean, he hustled. He hustled.
yeah. It's interesting. So sort of a little bit of a fast forward. Um, so this would have been 2002 or something,
Hmm.
somewhere in there.
Hmm.
I called you for a gig to come and play at 211, and it was two saxophones and
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, bass and drums.
Hmm.
Um, it was I record everything. I have to go back and dig those recordings back out. Um, but that was a it was a lot of fun. It was a great opportunity for me to play with you. I mean, we had history because we played in the
Right.
same all-state band and we
Right.
roomed together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that,
Wow.
and all of that, and um, I I learned a lot from you, and I continue to
Likewise.
yeah, oh, thank you, and I continue to check out what you're doing. Um, you know, uh, you're not a particularly aggressive social media, but
No, I, I'm not.
which is fine, and I totally understand.
Yeah.
Um, I have only pretty recently gotten more assertive about social media, just
Hmm.
trying to use it
Right.
um, uh, to further sort of propel my career and get things going. And
Right.
I've never been one, historically, I've never been one that wants to like take pictures with other people that I play with and like constantly be posting stuff.
Right.
But the more
I know. Right.
the more it is, it's like it's almost like you're forced to do that,
I know.
because and then it's like people don't think you're doing anything if you don't constantly have a bunch of stuff out there, because so many artists, even big name artists, are
Right.
constantly doing
Right.
this.
I know. It's an interesting thing, It's like sometimes I think, like with gigging, like I've said to other people before, like, when you're not on the scene, then you're not on the scene. And then when you are because people see you out, and it's like when people see you and they hear you, um, they're thinking about you, so you get called for stuff. I've always had this kind of cycle because I teach at a high school, so my year has this rhythm to it where uh, everything kind of comes to a screeching halt for me mid-August, and through much of the fall, I can work sporadically, but it's football season, and while I don't run the marching band, I'm involved in it. It's part of my job. So, it cuts in a little bit into sometimes playing opportunities. And so generally what happens, then it takes a couple months to kind of get the ball rolling, and then it kind of rolls, get some steam going, and then, August comes around again, and then put the brakes on. So that tends to, I will say that doesn't happen quite as much anymore because I've been in town here long enough now that I kind of play in, like I'm kind of in several different ensembles, and it kind of is what, like I don't really work very much freelance stuff anymore. It's like I'm kind of doing the stuff I do.
I don't think for the audience, I don't think we said where you live now.
So I live outside of Chicago, and I've been here since 2002. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, we settled in Chicago, and as much as I didn't like New York, I love it here.
Yeah, you know, that was you know, I applied for a job at a church in Chicago,
Hmm.
well, South Barrington,
Oh,
um,
yeah,
and yeah, so I was considering, you know, moving there at one point.
right.
It's one of the scenes where it's one of the see I'm from the Midwest,
Yep,
and you know Chicago is Midwest. I
it
mean it's a
is.
big city, but it's
Yep,
Midwest,
yep,
and it's in a lot of ways it's similar to Columbus. I
hmm,
mean, you know, a lot of the cities in the Midwest kind of have that, you know, everyman's kind
right,
of vibe, much more sort of family oriented. There's a lot of
right,
grass, you know.
right,
Uh,
right, right.
you know, other places in the country, there's not
Yeah,
as much grass.
right. That's true.
um, and as far as like, you know, uh, raising kids and you know having a family and stuff like that, and you know you get older and it's like that stuff starts to become like critically important,
Right,
um, and then you know stuff like cost of living,
right,
and all of that kind of stuff is you know is manageable, is doable. Although
yeah.
South Barrington ain't the,
No,
that
no,
was one of
and
the
it's
reasons.
certainly not necessary. I mean, like we hit sticker shock when we moved here from the Detroit area,
Yeah,
housing wise and tax, property taxes and stuff.
no.
And if there's one negative that this city has, man, it's the traffic. Uh, it is the traffic here is no joke. Like when I go in for gigs, it's not fun, but you got to do it. It is what it is. So
So okay, so I want to ask you one more question about
yeah.
um, maybe a little bit of history.
Hmm.
So the Thelonious Monk competition.
Hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
So that was, yeah, 96. I had moved back to Detroit, and I think that was the 10th year they had done it. So it was still somewhat early on. I think it was maybe only the second time that it was a saxophone year, because up until I think maybe 90 or not, whatever year Josh Redman won, it was only piano. And then I think somewhere around that time they started including other instruments. So sent a recording in, got called to go do the finals, which was kind of funny because I remember having a discussion so I was teaching full time at the time, teaching elementary band, and was talking to there was another teacher in the district who was kind of my mentor, this really great saxophonist, and he was a band leader in Detroit as well. His name is Lanny Austin. I remember talking to him about like, man, I don't know, I got to go to Washington for a couple days, and should I, take sick time or, I wisely took personal time because there ended up being some press involved. So I would have been in a
Uh,
little bit of trouble. But anyway, did the semifinals. Man, it was a blast. Like there were so many great saxophone players that were there that year. John Gordon won it. Jimmy Green was there. He came in second place. Joel Fromm was one of the semifinalists. John Ellis, Ralph Bowen, Dave Pietro. Of course, now I'm going to leave off because I think there was 10 or 12, something like that. I can't remember who else was there, but Andrew Spate was there. So it was, the rhythm section was Kenny Barron, Chris McBride, and Lewis Nash.
not too shabby.
Not too shabby, right? A lot of fun to play with. The hang was great. Everybody was super positive. It was just like, it was a lot of fun. And then they had this big giant gala because it was the 10th anniversary. So they had this big giant gala show that they were going to televise. Strangely enough, the competition had nothing to do with the show. Like, we weren't on that at all. But they had kind of like a star-studded, jazz star-studded television show that they were doing at the Kennedy Center that Bill Cosby bankrolled on his own, and they still had a hard time getting it on TV.
So you were third place in that competition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible, man.
Yeah, it's like hearing all the other saxophone players, and you're like, how, I don't know how they pick. They could have picked anybody. You know what I mean? Like, everybody was such a great player. And I do remember, though, the day of the semifinals, we were all sitting out in the audience, when they were announcing, and everybody had heard Joel Fromm play. Mm-hmm. And he's just so poetic and amazing. Mm-hmm. And like, everyone was kind of in disbelief that he hadn't made the finals. So I don't know, maybe I stole his spot. I'm sorry, Joel. I don't know if it was my fault or not, but same thing with Ralph Bowen. Like, I remember, I was listening to Ralph Bowen and transcribing his solos when he was in OTB, that band with Kenny Garrett and Mike Mossman and Ralph Peterson. And when I was looking at grad schools out east, I had gone and taken a lesson with him at Rutgers, and, was considering going there and stuff. And like, it was kind of surreal, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a really great moment. So what projects have you worked on, and what bands have you played in? I mean, we talked about the Groove Ted already.
Yeah.
And which were your favorite and why?
I think I'll focus on kind of what I've been doing here in Chicago for the last, almost 20 years now. I've been playing in the Chicago Jazz Orchestra, which is kind of a repertory big band. I play lead alto in that band. It was funny, when I first moved here, I kind of tried to keep it a secret that I played alto. And I don't know why. I had just decided I was a tenor player at some point in the late 90s. And I but in Detroit, I was still playing a lot of alto, and I'm like, I want to be a tenor player. So I moved here and didn't really tell anybody I played alto. I was just kind of playing tenor for a while, but there's not a lot of alto players. There's a million tenor players out there, but there's not a lot of alto players. So I play I've been playing in that band for a long time. And we have had, we've done several recordings. We did a recording. The guy who leads the band actually doesn't live too far from you. He teaches at the College of Worcester. His name's Jeff Lindbergh. So he started the band 40-some years ago. They used to be called the Jazz Members. And he's got a fantastic talent for transcription. And so he'll transcribe. We'll do these concerts where he'll just transcribe a whole record, and we'll play the record.
Wow.
And so anyway, he had done a transcription of Porgy and Bess, and we did a recording of that with Clark Terry. That was when I first joined the band. So that was a lot of fun. We've done a couple other recordings along the way. I've had kind of my own working band for the last 10 years. And we've got 2 recordings out, and that's got Ryan Cohen on piano, Dennis Carroll on bass, and Dana Hall on drums. I've been playing with Dennis and Dana since I moved here. So that is really, every time that group gets to play, I just feel super fortunate, because we're mostly playing my compositions and arrangements, but we've been playing together so long that it just, it's like putting on a robe and slippers, and we get into having a conversation and kind of pick up where we left off on the last gig. We just did a run kind of right before the curtain came down here. We did a run at the Jazz Showcase right at the end of February. Um, and that was kind of when people were first starting to talk about this virus
Yeah.
floating around, you know. Um, oh, you were going to ask.
Well, yeah, the just with the kind of abrupt stopping of everything, I had a lot of stuff on the schedule, and
Hmm.
it takes a long time to get a certain kind of momentum going,
Yep.
and I wonder if anything is ever going to be the same,
I
after
don't know.
this,
I
because you
don't
have to
know.
think about it. Uh, you know, I interviewed Byron Stripling for one
Hmm.
of these uh, interviews for this video series, and he was talking about that and further thinking about, like if you're, uh, say for instance, if it's in June or something, and you've got a big concert hall, and it's a orchestra,
Right.
and then all the people that would fill in the seats, and somebody starts coughing. You know what I'm saying? It's just like there's I think that there's like
Yeah.
some reverberations of
Right.
how this stuff is gonna,
Right.
um, you know, and I pray, I hope and pray that we are able to get back to the place where we can, especially artists,
Right.
musicians in particular,
Yeah.
uh, are able to kind of resume and get back to it,
Right.
because we need that, we need
We
live
do.
music.
We do. And I hope so. Selfishly, what I like about making music is what happens communally in the moment, you
Right.
know. And I see people trying to kind of adjust to this and do things collaboratively online, and that's cool. It's just not really my thing because that's not the kind of music I'm interested in making. Is super interactive, and you can't really do that when people are doing one part at a time in their
Yeah.
house, you know. Um, and I think there's a place for that, but that's not. That's what I'm missing the most, you know. Um, I kind of had, I was doing okay the first couple of weeks because it was like I had been super busy for the last year and a half, and and I'm also kind of naturally a homebody anyway. So it's like, well, this is cool. It's kind of like a forced vacation, and I don't really like to leave the house anyhow. So this is great, you know. But then it kind of hit me last week, like we don't know when this is going to end, and um, I like to make music with my colleagues on the bandstand, and I like to make music with my students in person.
Right.
I don't get to do what I do right now. I don't get to be who I am, you know? And I'm not complaining about it because there's way more important stuff going on right now. Um, but, I still had psychologically had to kind of work through that.
Yeah. Fortunately, I still have a couple things that are still happening. I'm a minister of music at a church,
Hmm.
and we're doing online services. So there's no congregation there,
Right,
but but the service is live.
right.
So there's actually still some playing,
Hmm.
and then uh, minimal number of people, and all
Right,
that.
right.
Uh, and this past week, I was able to do a live. Well, it wasn't live; it was recorded. So I recorded on a Friday for a service that was going to happen on a Sunday. So a
Hmm.
bunch of churches are doing that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah,
But it's not the same. It's not the same as having a congregation and
yep,
kind of feeling the way
right,
that the congregation is responding.
yeah,
Um, and but fortunately, that has still survived, because I'm not sure what headspace I'd be in right now. I mean, you go from like your whole life is like devoted to playing music for people, and that's all you do,
right,
and
yeah,
then that part of it getting taken away
right,
is a pretty
right,
tough thing.
right.
Um,
Add to that, I have so many friends who make their living playing,
right, right,
and they had months of work vanish in like 2 days. So not
yeah,
only do they not get to feed their artistic soul, but they're also, having a hard time feeding their families.
yeah. And I'm not sure that uh, there's some legislation that's supposed to be coming through to get some folks some checks and all of
Yeah.
that, and that's cool. But I'm not sure that people really understand uh, the what's really happened to you know musicians and artists right
Right.
now. I don't freelance folks. I don't think that they really understand. Um,
No.
this has been a tremendous, and it also kind of shows how kind of flimsy stuff is.
Right.
You
Right.
think that tomorrow's going to come. You think that everything is, hey, I've been working towards all this stuff, and
Yeah.
to have all of this stuff just kind of wipe out without even, without even a thought, just to
Right.
vanish completely
Right.
is kind of disheartening.
And at all levels, right? Like it doesn't matter if you are people playing at the highest levels,
Right.
touring the world, or if you're
Right.
Joe that plays at the neighborhood restaurant. Like it, everybody's on the same. This is man. This thing has been the great equalizer.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, in our conversations, and one I know about you, uh, you seem to be a spiritual person,
Mm-hmm.
and that seems to be a serious, critical, serious part of your life. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. My wife and I've always been a practicing Catholic. I grew up that way, and that's a very important part of my life. I haven't really, interestingly enough, being a jazz musician, there's music in the Catholic Church. It doesn't really has never really lended the liturgy doesn't I guess lend itself to the kind of music we play, unless I ever feel moved to kind of move things in that direction. You kind of have to make something happen. Um,
Yeah, it's kind of challenging. I'm Orthodox myself,
mhm.
and so, um, uh, yeah. I work at a Protestant church. I'm at a
Right,
missionary Baptist church because
right,
that's that's kind of the native habitat for what I do.
right,
Um, but as far as some of the stuff that I would like to do,
right,
it's a little more challenging in that context.
right. Now I will
Uh,
say that I used to play quite regularly, um, at a couple different churches, when we were in Detroit, and then when we first moved here, I played every week. And in some ways, actually, first of all, it was great to use the gift that I've been given, um, to serve God. Uh, but also, I kind of felt like it was a learning experience too, because it really, as a jazz musician, you kind of get into playing, a lot of chops, and it's kind of aggressive, right? Um, but to really put yourself in a space where you're going to serve the music and prayer,
yeah,
it's a different mindset. And I think actually it ended up informing everything I ever played, to be honest. I think it put me in a headspace where, like, okay, whatever situation I'm in, I'm not going to try to assert my agenda here. I'm going to try to do what the music is calling for, or what the
yeah,
moment is calling for. And I think I actually learned that playing, um, in church. But then I felt like I was sort of being called to do some other things, partly because my schedule was getting so goofy, but also I wanted to get involved, like in liturgy planning and stuff. So I still play a few times a year, like I would have been playing this weekend, for Holy Thursday, and we would have done the Easter Vigil and stuff. But that's not because, right, yeah, they're down to where our church is. They're streaming mass, but it's just the pianist and a cantor, because they're keeping it pretty sparse.
yeah. I haven't been paying close attention to uh, what's happening with communion in the Catholic Church, um, because of the virus and everything.
Right.
Uh, but in the Orthodox Church, it's been suspended. You
Yeah,
know,
they did a couple kind of leading up to shelter in place. They were doing
hmm
just the host. They
right?
had moved away from the cup, probably a month, 6 weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, we haven't had. It's been weeks actually. I mean, all the dioceses around here stopped having mass in person at least 3, maybe 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So
You know, uh, the timing of this whole crisis and how it sort of lines up with Lent is um, uh, so I don't know. It's almost maybe the crisis is sort of forcing me to be more serious about Lent.
hmm
Um, uh, less maybe eating stuff that I shouldn't be eating anyway, right?
yeah, right,
Less going to restaurants and
right,
indulging in
yeah,
stuff, less
right, yeah,
um, in more time to be with family,
yeah,
theoretically more time to pray,
hmm
and all of that. Um, you know, trying to find different ways to, uh, you know, see the sort of brighter side of this, to see how there could be some positive things. Um, this series of interviews was, I mean, that's all this is about. Is I want to try to do something positive,
yeah,
though we're in the kind of situation that we're in, and highlight some folks that I really respect, and and I honestly I want my students and the people that follow me to
hmm
hear what you all have to say. You know, um,
yeah,
speaking of that, um, I've I've I have felt like with music, I, I I don't really remember a time where I really chose it per se. I feel as though it sort of chose me,
hmm
and it was the only thing I ever wanted to do. How it seems to me like you're in the same boat.
yeah. I think up when I was, I don't know, maybe around 13, 14 or something. I had it in my head I was going to be an investment banker, which is ridiculous because I'm horrible at math. Uh, but the summer of my sophomore year, like the summer after my sophomore year in high school, I went to Interlaken um, and did this 2 week saxophone intensive with Don Cinta. And I just remember riding home from that camp. First of all, it was a 2 week thing that just flew by. Um, I couldn't believe how fast it went, and I had never been happier in my life. And I remember riding home thinking, man, I just made music all day long for 2 weeks, and this is the happiest I've ever been. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is what I have to do, you know. So I think, yeah, similar to you, I think music does choose. It does choose you in some respects. I've had that happen with some students. Sometimes I gotta tell their parents, like, I think you've gotta. I mean, because I don't necessarily encourage anyone to go into this. Like, I don't feel like you should go into music as a professional unless you have to. And by that, I mean, it's the thing that's the only thing you can see yourself doing. And so I've had some conversation with parents, and this has just been a few times really, where I'll say, I think you've got a musician on your hands. Um, but we got to find that out now. Uh, and so I'll try to point them in a direction of somebody to go study with privately that's going to really push them. And it's like, is this really what you want to do? You know, are we going to get serious about this? Because I'd rather let's get serious about it now and figure it out while you're still in high school than go off to college and spend a bunch of money and find out that, I don't know, this is kind of hard. And I guess I don't like it that much.
Right. So, tell me about. I mean, you've talked a little bit about teachers that have been influential, have been critical, and
Mm-hmm.
important to you, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, we share one of those
Mm-hmm.
teachers.
That was a
And
great interview you did with him, by the way.
oh yeah, um, I have to tell you, man, I owe so much to that dude,
Same.
and he is such a generous and not willing to take credit for things. He's just such a beautiful person.
Yep.
And I feel like the music, yeah, I mean, I learned how to circular breathe from him. My concept of air support and things is all him. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like so much that I teach, even stuff that I'm probably not aware of, is stuff
Yeah.
that I got from him. You know.
Right. I always appreciated his approach too, because Trent would let you be yourself. Like I felt like he was a coach, and you would go into your lesson and you'd play something, and instead of saying, you ought to do it this way or you ought to do it that way, he would say, well, why don't you think about doing it this way or think about doing that, or try this, right? And it wasn't like you had to do it, but he gave you options, and I think at least for me, I felt like he got me to start looking at things through more than one prism, and just be a little more thoughtful about how I approached music, And he was also just, to navigate kind of the early professional thing too. He was super helpful in that way as well, you know.
Such an organic approach. I feel like he had. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
would learn things himself, and then he would create resources so that other people didn't have to sort of learn it the clunky way that he had to learn it. You know,
Right.
and also, like I said, and I said this before already, very generous. You know, there's a lot of teachers, and I'm sure you're aware of teachers that are like this because all of us have been aware of this or have known this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of teachers that, here's the curriculum. This is the stuff I'm going to show you.
Right.
But then the real stuff that makes me me and makes
Mm-hmm.
it so that you never can catch up with me, that's
Right.
the stuff I'm hiding behind here.
Right.
I'm not going to tell
Right.
you that. And then I'll say stuff to you like, um, uh, uh, you just got to learn it on your own, or you
Mm-hmm.
know, hard knocks or whatever.
Right.
Some
Right.
goofy type of stuff. And it's like,
Right.
what is the point of me coming to study with you if you're not going to tell me anything and you're going to make me try
Right.
to
Yeah. Right.
have to go through it myself anyway?
Right. Right.
So
Now, I
that,
do think there's a certain thing to a teacher who will kind of guide a student down a path of
yeah.
discovery, right? Like I'm not going to just hand it to you necessarily. I
Oh
think
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a
right,
certain, like you've got to struggle through stuff to learn it, right?
right.
But you sort of guide them to that place, like, because otherwise where do they don't know where to go. Um, but if I can go on a 2-minute tangent about Trent,
Sure,
because
absolutely.
I was thinking about this actually when I was watching your your interview with him, and I much of what I have going on in my life in the last 20 years is because of Trent, and here's why. Not just because of college, but because so the summer between the year I graduated from high school and I started at Western, at that time Trent was teaching at a camp in northern Wisconsin called Birch Creek, where it's like a 2-week jazz camp. They actually do 2 different sessions. You go up there's 2 different big bands. It's a great camp. The kids play 8 concerts over 2 weeks. Like you show up on Monday, you audition, and then you have a concert Wednesday night. It's like they don't screw around. They get right to it. There's a faculty band as well that is filled out with mostly college teaching assistants. And so they needed a Barry player in this faculty band. And so Trent called me up and said, we need a Barry player for this thing. You want to come up with me? And I had orientation at Western. I guess it must have been coincidentally. It was already right before he was supposed to go up. But there was like a 48-hour gap between the orientation ending and when he was going to go up. And so I wasn't even really his student yet. And he let me crash at his house, and he drove me up with him to Wisconsin. And we did this camp. And up there I met Jeff Campbell, who's the program director, bass player, teaches at Eastman. And then, you know, fast forward like to 98, and they were looking for, they needed a tenor teacher on the faculty there because they hire, usually there's two, for each instrument, there's two faculty members, two saxophone players, two trombone, two trumpet. And there was a trumpet player that had started doing the camp for a year or two named Joey Tartell that I actually had met at Western.
Yep.
Because his wife at the time was a TA, right? So Jeff asks Joey, you know, you kind of know the deal with the gig. It's like there's a lot of playing, but you got to be a good teacher too, because, you know, you coach a combo and you're teaching the saxophone master classes. And so, you know, it's a little bit of a unique skill set. And he recommended me. Well, Jeff already knew me from having done it when Trent got me up there. And then so I started teaching at that camp for the next 10 or 12 years. You know, there were a bunch of Chicago musicians. I met guys from Chicago, so that once I moved here, it was, you know, making some phone calls. In fact, I had become really good friends with one of the guys who was one of the student band directors named Jim Stombrys. And when we were going to move to Chicago, I called up Jim and said, man, we're moving to Chicago. I need a teaching gig. Like, can you help me? And he hooked me up. I got a job teaching at a middle school in not too far from here. And I did that for a couple of years until a job at the school he was at, which is where I've been since 2004, opened up. And, you know, like I can trace all of that stuff. You know, me being in Chicago, me having this teaching job, people I've met, things I've done, all goes back to Trent calling me up and taking me up to Birch Creek.
Yeah, Trent is the man.
Yeah.
Such a great dude. Um, so let me ask you about players and maybe composers
Mm-hmm.
that you've been particularly influenced by. And you can kind of give me the early, I've been more influenced by this person, and lately
Right.
I've been more into this.
You know, I think in terms of saxophone playing, early on, it was people like Sonny Stitt and Stanley Turrentine, I'm sorry, Eddie Harris, and well, and Gene Ammons too. Sonny Stitt, Gene Ammons, Eddie Harris, John Coltrane, Michael Brecker, Joe Henderson. I think that's kind of the crux of people that I was really into. Um, Also, as an alto player, Cannonball. Uh, the thing I really loved about Sonny Stitt was, you know, on alto and tenor, just sounded so great and had his own voice on both instruments.
Yeah.
Um, Compositionally, I think, you know, as a jazz composer, I think we all have a great debt to people like Wayne Shorter. Um, and Duke Ellington too. Duke Ellington, Thelonious Monk. Even though I mean, it's really difficult to write like that. Those guys had such unique voices. But just to be kind of inspired by that. Um, Classically, I've always been influenced, I think, by people like Hindemith, and more recently, I've really gotten into. There was a period of time, kind of as part of my teaching job, I was teaching orchestra for about 6 years. And so, you know, I had never really dug very deeply into the music of Beethoven. And man, I went way deep into Beethoven. And it's just the motivic development and the way he approaches harmony, you know, on its surface. I think when I was a student, and especially, you know, kind of identifying as a jazz musician, I wasn't listening deep enough. It just seemed, you know, it's kind of tertial harmony and it's not that interesting, you know. But as I got older, it's interesting. The older I've gotten, the more I've gotten into music that appears to be simple, but is very subtly complex.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so music like Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms. That's kind of a lot of the stuff I've been I've been listening to. Strange enough, I don't listen to all that much jazz anymore. Like I'll go back to some older recordings that I had listened to, but occasionally I'll listen to new stuff that comes out. And I hate to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, you know, but I guess I like music that is got some African element to it and is singing, you know, and I guess a lot of stuff now is kind of mathy. So I can appreciate it, but it's not, I don't really listen to it for enjoyment. It doesn't move me here, you know?
I see.
So I'm not sure if I've answered the question completely.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Off track.
I mean, I think something that we have in common is Sonny Stitt and Coltrane. All of the players that you said, of course,
Right, of
have
course.
been tremendously influential
Right.
to me. But Stitt and Coltrane, early on, it was all I wanted was Stitt. That was
Right.
it, you know.
Yeah.
And I backed into Charlie Parker, and it wasn't really until I got into college that I could really start to digest Coltrane. Now, prior to college, I listened to a lot of Coltrane because of all of those records that he's on, you
Right.
know, those Miles Davis records in particular. But it wasn't really until college that I really that I had a place, you know, in my head to try to start to distill some of what it was that he's saying, because it's so profound and
Right.
so different over the different periods, you know.
Yeah. That's true.
Also, someone that has been influential, and I have to be careful because his primary influences are the same as mine, Stitt and Coltrane. That has been influential in a lot of those records in the '90s, late '90s, mid to late '90s. Kenny Garrett,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I listen to if I go back and start listening to like Songbook, for instance, that record.
Yeah.
If I listen to that too much, man, it just starts coming out of my horn, and I have to.
Right.
And everybody knows what that's from.
Oh, for sure. Same. You got to be careful with it. It's really, I think it may be one of the reasons why I started gravitating towards tenor, because I got so into him for a while that it was hard not to do that. You know, it's so
It's like what's not to love? It's like
exactly.
It's like it's so.
It's everything
killing.
I love about music. It's rhythmic. It's soulful. It's singing. It's harmonically complex.
Yeah.
He tells a story when he plays a solo. Are you hip to that Miles in Austria, where they do Human Nature?
I'm not sure. I mean, of course, I know the human nature, but
Right.
I'm not sure.
I had kind of gone back to that because I'm in the middle of reading Steve Lukather's autobiography. And he was the guitar player in Toto.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, they were talking about I hadn't realized when Miles recorded Human Nature, it was with the guys in Toto. So he did that with Lukather and Porcaro and Steve Porcaro, because Steve Porcaro wrote the tune, right? So anyway, I was listening. I went back and listened to the Miles version, and then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go back. There's that live version that's got that Kenny Garrett solo that's just, oh man, it's so good. I mean, because he starts here and he just hangs here for a long time. And the rhythm section does the same thing. They just simmer for the longest time. And then, man, by the time you get to the end, it's like, that's how you play a solo.
Yeah. He's incredible like that, and obviously he picks certain rhythm section players. That's another thing about all of his records. He's got the baddest dudes. I mean, and I can kind of go back further than that. Branford, like the crazy people music in particular.
Man. I have somewhere laying around. I have a tape of those guys playing that music at the Detroit Jazz Festival Do you remember they used to broadcast it on the radio?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I recorded it, and
Man,
man,
you
I gotta
gotta
find it.
yeah, you gotta hook me up with that.
Yeah, I gotta find it. It might be. I mean, if I don't have it, it might actually be at my mom's somewhere in the basement. So I better do some sleuthing because yeah.
All right, so you know, and you intimated this, the uh, how your schedule sort of there's an ebb and flow.
Hmm.
Certain times a year you have more time to play
Right.
gigs and things, and other
Yeah.
times you don't. Um, and I've noticed in my life the more uh, the more responsibilities I have, the sometimes the less time there is to practice, and
Hmm.
then something that we don't talk about as much is we don't talk very much about energy. So you may have time, but if you don't have energy, you're also not gonna be
That's
productive.
true. That's true.
And so I've thought a lot about the most efficient ways to practice, um, and that's been very important. Being a multi instrumentalist to try to give some love and respect
Yeah.
to all that's needed, but still to try to cover ground and try to get. So I'm still trying to get down the road. There's still all this stuff in my head that I'm still can't quite unpack yet. I'm still trying to get there. So my question for you is, um, what kind of stuff are you practicing now?
Uh, to be honest, I think I do most of because I play every day and I'll play a lot at school,
Yeah.
and that's to sort of cover sort of maintenance stuff. You know,
Yeah.
like in every ensemble, we'll start the rehearsal with long tones. So I'm playing long tones several times a day. And the first class I teach is the freshman woodwinds. So that I kind of alternate between playing flute and clarinet. So that way I kind of cover playing long tones and scales and stuff with those kids. Because yeah, it's like I just don't have time to really. I mean, unless I'm getting up for a gig where I've got specific music to practice, I don't necessarily shed flute and clarinet the way I used to, because I just don't have time or energy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you come home from school and I got a gig tonight and I just need to like take a nap and grab a meal and then go sit in traffic. That's all I got. There's only so
Yeah.
much time. Um, so I think, I have gotten into practicing saxophone in the sense of conceptual practice less and less, and doing more of it either mentally or doing conceptual things at the piano, kind of working some stuff out. And then maybe I'll record, like if I'm working on a tune and I've got something that, harmonically is going to be kind of difficult, I'll record it, make a little, practice track, and then just improvise over that and try to find, I guess the older I've gotten, the more I'm trying to play more simply and play melodies and trying to find that common thread between harmonies. And that just takes time. And so what I'll do is I'll just, kind of practice that way. It's like put it on and then just kind of work my way through it slowly and organically until things start to emerge and I'm really starting to hear connections that, maybe aren't so cerebral.
Mhm.
But that's just kind of where I'm at now. I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to let things happen naturally musically and not force them, you know?
Yeah. That's great. And you know, practicing. I think when I was younger, I think I had in my head that I'm always going to practice a certain amount of time, and it's always
Mm-hmm.
going to be this stuff and this stuff or whatever. But I think as I've gotten older, um, I've been able to become more efficient doing certain things, and because certain fundamentals have been developed and built up, it's not always necessary for me to go back and play all of the same rudiments that I already know how to
Right.
play.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
if that stuff starts getting clunky, then I can always go back to it,
Yep.
and spend the time. But
Right.
it, I think I've used this same analogy in all of these interviews, but if you're trying to climb the mountain, and you're halfway up the mountain, if you keep going back to the bottom of the mountain, you're not going to get anywhere.
That's right.
So
that's right. You know how to climb.
Yeah.
Right. You got that far, and you're still climbing. I'm still playing the saxophone.
Right.
But it's like now I'm trying to edit out the stuff that's not essential, and get to the I don't know, the stuff that is going to move people, and move the other guys on the bandstand.
Yes. So, how do you see yourself in the future? What goals do you have and unfinished projects, and maybe some things that aren't even related to music too?
Musically speaking, we sort of started a project actually with Xavier, along with Clark Summers on bass, and it seems like all my projects have Dana Hall on them because he's my favorite drummer. We have a special way of playing together. So, but anyway, that project, we did a weekend at the Green Mill about a year and a half ago, and then try to get some other things. Everybody's so busy. That particular band is hard to get together. So I've been trying to create opportunities for us to kind of get some stuff going so we can hopefully play a bunch and then go make a record. I've also been doing some trio stuff with Clark and Dana that I had planned on trying to maybe record this summer or fall. So we'll have to see about that. And then I've got, I don't know, probably 70% of a record written with the group that I've been working with for the last 10 years. So that's kind of, my own projects that I kind of see. The other thing I want to do at some point in the near future, maybe within the next 3 to 5 years, is do a recording with organ. I'm going to put this out on the internet because if I want to make this happen, I really want to do it with Larry Goldings. So I'm going to save my pennies and try to he's been my favorite living organist for a long time. So I kind of try to make that happen. And then, continue. I play in one of Dana's ensembles where it's a 2-tenor bass drum thing where Jeff Bradfield and myself play a lot of woodwinds. It kind of looks like a music shop up there. And then I also play, the pianist in my group leads his own sextet. His name is Ryan Cohen. He's a fantastic writer. And we just had a project that we had done and recorded with strings that was supposed to come out. Well, it's still going to come out this summer. We had some gigs lined up at the end of June, so hopefully those will still happen. I guess we'll have to see. But he always really challenges me, particularly on my doubles. He's got, I'm playing flute, alto flute, clarinet, soprano, tenor, improvising on the flute and the alto flute, which I really enjoy. But, he writes music that's hard, really, really challenging. But it's beautiful at the same time. I don't know how he does it. So, that's kind of that's where I'm at musically right now. Personally, I think I've just been trying to the last 4 or 5 years, I guess. I kind of made a commitment to getting healthy. I had gotten pretty heavy, so I tried to lose a bunch of weight and had gotten into lifting weights. I know you like to do that.
A little bit.
I had a little setback back in the fall, though. I herniated a disc in my low back, so I haven't lifted much since October. But
I've been there. I've been there.
Okay, so there's light at the end of the tunnel.
There is. There is.
I've been doing a lot of other exercises trying to get strong in that area. So that's get back to riding my bike and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I've seen some pictures of you with that the bike helmet on.
Yep, I do like to ride my bike.
Yes. So.
Yeah, and I like fishing too. That's the other thing I like to do.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you'd like to plug, or I mean, I'm going to put your website and whatever
Yeah,
else in the
yeah,
description of this video so people can figure out how to, get a hold of you.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this is, boy, man, this thing happened at a strange time for me because I don't have a lot on the horizon with my own groups, and it was kind of like, okay, it was time to kind of get hustle and get some stuff going.
mhm.
So I don't really have anything to plug at the moment because I don't have any new recordings coming out, or I was kind of moving towards making that stuff. Um, Hopefully in the next year or two. So, um, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'll put your information in the
Yeah,
description,
appreciate it.
and so maybe get some clicks on your
Yeah,
website. Do you
yeah,
have like a YouTube channel?
I do. Boy, I think if you just search for John Wojciechowski saxophone, it'll come up. I've
Okay.
got some concert uh, performances up there, like broken down into individual songs, but um, that's about it. That's up there. It's like the whole social media thing, man. Because you have a full-time teaching gig. It's hard. You're playing
It
gigs
is.
and you're teaching, and it's hard to make time. Part of that time too is if you want to keep playing, you got to hustle to get work. When do you have time to like deal with editing video and posting pictures and you know
It's challenging.
it really is.
Uh, Hopefully, uh, like I said, we can with this interview we can drive some traffic
Yeah.
uh, to your website and various things that you're doing. Um, but yeah, it is what it is.
Yep.
This is uh, yeah.
There's
I don't know
only
what to say. I don't have any answers, man.
no, because I mean, there's
I
only so much time in the day, and as you get older, like you have to be, like you were saying earlier, you have to start watching your energy level, and I got to make sure I have energy to teach. I got to make sure I have energy for the gig. I got like
yeah, energy from my wife.
yeah, right. You got to
Yeah,
be
no,
there for your family.
that's right.
I will say that's been one thing that's been nice about this. I've spent more time with my wife in the last 3 weeks, I think, than we have probably over that 3 week period, um, than we have since we've been married. I That's been great.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you so much
Thanks for having
for.
me, man. I really appreciate it. I'm honored that you asked.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. All right. God bless you and be safe.
All right, you too.